Well, no is the answer, and Dr. Brett Tucker has the questions. It's another Talkin' Science Story of the Week.
Across Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts and YouTube, this is Talking Science with Dr. Brad Tucker and Matt Miller.
Alrighty, Brad, and our last story this week, we're going to come down from that high of a rocket launch, which is the first time we've had an American crewed rocket launch in the history of Talkin' Science, which is only 18 months old, but still. So coming down, and you're going to tell me no a couple of times. We've got some myths to bust. The sun is in its quietest period, and that's it. All hell's going to break loose, and Ice Age is coming.
Yeah, unfortunately, no. This is an easy no. It's one of those things. Yes, the sun is in a quiet period. The sun has an 11-year solar cycle. And people said, well, maybe this is associated with mini ice ages or will change the temperature of the planet. It doesn't really work like that. The heat output and the energy output of the sun doesn't change. It's just the magnetic activity and the solar flares. So it's actually a good thing. There's less solar flares. That means there's less types of radiation bombarding it. There's less flares and the chance of radiation harming astronauts in space. So good for a rocket launch. It's a classic example of, we know the sun affects life here on Earth, obviously, but the timescales are just not the same. And what we see relative to environmental changes cannot be explained by sunburps, unfortunately, or the lack of sunburps.
Well, the sun does experience regular 11-year intervals. So there's solar maximum and solar minimum. So this is the solar minimum period that we're in now. This is scientific fact here that these things happen, and we haven't been having ice ages every 11 years.
That's right. Every 11 years, it's not all of a sudden, really cold. And even when people say mini ice age and imagine ice age, it's not like woolly mammoths walking around with snow covered. We're talking about a couple degrees temperature dip, and average temperatures. But even then, it doesn't happen every 11 years. We would see that. And conversely, every other 11 years, every top of the cycle, it doesn't get hotter, right? People, because we've been monitoring the sun for 200 plus years. In fact, why Mount Stromlo, where I work, was built was to help this global project to monitor the sun. As we've talked about before, we have good baselines of how the sun varies over these 11-year cycles. And, every 11-year cycle is slightly different than the other, just as seasons are. But we don't see those correlations with the temperatures here on Earth.
Having said that, scientists at NASA are saying that we're in a grand solar minimum.
That's right. It's one of those where the minimum is weaker than others. That seasonal fluctuation is worse than others. But it means it's just the sun is really boring to look at. That's actually what it means. Is if you have a solar telescope looking for solar flares and sunspots, there ain't nothing going on in the sun.
All right. Well, the other question that I have for you, Brad, NASA scientists claim to have discovered a parallel universe where time moves backwards.
This is a comical one, because not only is it a no, but no one really knows how the whole story started. I mean, yes, we do. But so firstly, the experiment was a telescope in Antarctica looking for neutrinos, these high energy particles. And what they found was particles kind of going the wrong direction. We expect them to coming from space, so coming from the top down. These appear to be coming from the bottom up, which doesn't really make sense. It's either that they've made it all the way through the Earth, or they bounced off the ice or something. And so obviously it's an interesting result. Neutrinos are one of the more least understood particles in the particle family. And so obviously it requires some explanation. It could be how neutrinos move. There could be elements of new physics here that we don't know neutrinos. Now, obviously, one of the always out there ideas, and it's a legitimate one, is this could be a sign of higher level physics, what we call CPT violations, and something that could be a sign that there is the anti-universe, not necessarily parallel universe, right? The opposite pairs. And so that obviously led to anti-time, which obviously led to time running backwards, which obviously led to parallel universe, which led to the New York Post saying there's a parallel universe existing before us. Oh no. Look, I know it explains 2020, but I don't think that's necessarily the answer.
I love my mum's when my mum read this article, she said, "But where is it?"
Exactly. Well, so and this is actually a kind of a cool thing when we talk about antimatter being a real thing that we know and physically can measure. We know we don't have enough antimatter in the universe, because if we had equal amounts of matter and antimatter, that equals 0, and we're here asking that question. So we know that it's not 0.
Or are we?
And so where the antimatter goes, how it evolves, it's a big area in physics. And so how does it sit alongside us is always one of these interesting questions about it. But unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be, we have evidence of it. Look, hey, there is an outside chance in 100 years, more experiments prove that it could be true. But in Antarctica, this was done on a big balloon with an instrument, but there's also what's called ice cube, which is this big array of neutrinos buried deep underneath the ice of Antarctica, and it didn't detect it. So clearly, there's something we just don't understand, which will probably be way more boring than parallel universe.
And of course, don't forget to find Brad on social media at btucker22 on Twitter. On Facebook, Dr. Brad Tucker. Search for Trekzone all over social media as well. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, YouTube. We're in your favorite podcasting app as well. Just search for Trekzone wherever you want to find us, and I'm sure you will do just that. What a week of Talking Science it has been. I'm Matt Miller. Thanks so much for watching and listening.